Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Professor Dan Gilbert.
Let's see, can I use this wireless too? Could we get that work? Oh, magic. Wonderful. What a pleasure to be here with you. I was recently introduced. Somebody said, Professor Gilbert is going to talk about the world's oldest question, what is the secret of happiness? And I found that to be very odd because this is not an old question. This is an extraordinarily new question. The idea that happiness might be a secret. Look, for most of human history, life was, in the words of the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, nasty, short, and brutish. Life was short, health was poor, food was scarce, most of your children wouldn't live to adulthood, and basically you got up in the morning and you tried not to die. That was the to-do list for the day. And then there were three revolutions. There was an agricultural revolution, there was an industrial revolution, there was a technological revolution, and for the first time in the history of the world, large populations of people on Earth have everything they could possibly want, certainly everything they need. Now, our ancestors knew what happiness was. Happiness is what happens when you get what you want, and that never happens on Earth in this lifetime. And yet now we have populations of people who do have everything they want, and guess what? They're not all perfectly happy. So this is what Huxley called the slaying of a beautiful hypothesis by an ugly fact. It can't be that happiness is simply what happens when you get what you want, because people get what they want and they're not always happy. How is that possible? How can you get what you're aiming for and not be happy when you get it? The answer is you could be aiming for the wrong things. And indeed, we do aim for the wrong things, and there are two main reasons why. One is our imaginations fail us, and I'm not going to talk about that today. The other thing is we get a lot of bad advice. A lot of bad advice. We're all citizens of nations, we're members of families, and we are surrounded by bartenders and taxi drivers and aunts and uncles and yentas and grandmothers and rabbis and priests and philosophers and talk show hosts, all of whom know exactly what we need to do to be happy, and they're very happy to tell us. These are three advertisements that were from the year I was born. These are not comedy. These are real advertisements that gave my mother advice about how to be happy and how to make me happy. Smoke for pleasure today. Start your children on cola early, and then, of course, TV. Happiness shared by the whole family. Now, these look funny to us now because we know this was impossibly bad advice. All of this advice was terrible advice for how to have a happy, healthy family, life, or child. What I want to suggest to you is that a lot of the advice that we get today about what makes people happy is right, but lots of it is wrong. And it is the job of science to distinguish between the two. Luckily, I think for all of us, in the last 10 to 20 years, psychologists, economists, even neuroscientists have gotten interested in the question of happiness, and they are using exactly the same experimental and statistical tools that we as scientists use to answer questions like, what causes cancer? What causes butterflies to migrate? What causes global warming? To answer the question, what causes happiness? And I thought in the short amount of time I had with you, I would give you a little insight into what they've found. Now, this is my mother. And my mother, it turns out, she gave me lots of advice. Don't wear a beard, it hides your beautiful face. Wear clean underwear, so if you get hit by a car, the doctor will know you're from a good family. Some of you have heard this advice. But she gave me three main pieces of advice about how to be a happy person and have a happy life. And it turns out, I thought it was Jewish mothers said this. It turns out it's mothers from Africa to India give their children essentially these three pieces of advice. First of all, find a nice girl and settle down. Wouldn't hurt if she were Jewish. Second, find a job that is meaningful and fulfilling. It wouldn't hurt if you were comfortable. And third, have children. Wouldn't hurt if it were soon. Now, you probably all heard these three pieces of advice from your mom. If you didn't, then she probably isn't really your mother, and you should check. The question is, was my mom right or was she wrong about these three things? The answer is yes. She was right and she was wrong. And we now know what things she was right and what things she was wrong about. So let me just go through these three. How about marriage? How many people here think marriage causes happiness? Ma'am, you're not allowed to raise your husband's hand. That isn't fair. Okay, so the minority of you think marriage causes happiness. Many of you think marriage is a sign of happiness. If you're happy and you're in love, then you get married, but marriage doesn't actually make you happy. Well, let's examine the facts. The first brute fact is that married people are happier than unmarried people. Unmarried people are divorced, they're widowed, but they're also single. They're even people who are cohabiting and living together. And if you look closely at the differences between married and unmarried people, you'd understand why. Married people live longer. Married people are healthier. Married people make more money per capita. Married people have more sex and report enjoying it more. Virtually everything you could imagine might make a person happy, married people seem to have more of. Now, it could be that you see data like these because marriage makes people happy. The other possibility is happy people get married. Both hypotheses turn out to be true. It is true that happy people do better on the marriage market. Who wants to marry Eeyore when you can marry Piglet, right? You want somebody who smiles when they wake up in the morning. But it also looks like marriage causes happiness. So here's a typical pattern of findings. If you look at people's happiness before and after the wedding, you see that as people approach the wedding day, they're getting happier and happier. Right after the wedding, there's a honeymoon period in which their happiness keeps rising, and then happiness starts to fall. But notice that at least 6 years out, it hasn't come back to its initial baseline. Does it ever? Yes. There's some argument. Different data sets show different numbers for when. 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, 12 years. Okay, let's not quibble about numbers. It looks like marriage buys you some reasonable amount of time of increased happiness. Now, since marriage seems to buy you some increase in happiness, you would expect divorce to make you unhappy, and you would be quite wrong about that. Because for both men and women, divorce is also a source of happiness. Now, you might say, how do I put these two facts together? Does this suggest I should just keep getting married and then divorced and then married and getting divorced and accrue happiness with each new transition? No. What these two facts suggest is that marriage makes people happy, but happy marriage makes people really happy. That is, when marriages are bad, we get relief from getting out of them, but when they are good, we seem to get an extra benefit from staying in them. What about money? I won't even ask you, does money make you happy? I did a television show where I stood on Boston Common, a big park, and asked passersby, sir, do you think money can buy happiness? And almost to the person, I get the responses back like, from a Hallmark greeting card. Oh no, money can't buy happiness. No, true happiness comes from, and then they name their favorite thing, God, love, children, whatever. Okay, well, they're all wrong. Money absolutely, clearly buys happiness. Here is a very typical curve for the relationship between money and happiness. Notice two things. There is no point at which getting richer makes you sadder. No point on the curve. Okay? Each dollar buys more happiness, but notice another thing. Somewhere on this curve, it gets harder and harder to get happiness out of money. There's what statisticians call an inflection point, a point where the curve starts to flatten. It never flattens completely, but it gets pretty flat, and it's harder to get more happiness out of money. Where is that magical point? $100 million a year? $500 million? Again, studies differ, but probably somewhere between $40,000 and $70,000 per year. And you can do the translation into shekels if you need to. It's not a bad salary, but it's certainly not a king's salary. The question about curves like this, and this is a very well-replicated phenomenon, the question is, why? Is money just inherently the kind of thing that once you have enough, you've got enough, and there's just nothing more you can do with it? Is it like pancakes? You eat one, it's great. 2, it's fantastic. 3, you're starting to get full. By 5, you don't want any more. That's one theory. The other possibility is that if money doesn't continue to make you happy, then you're not spending it right. And in a sense, that must be true, because money is the ability to do almost anything a human being could want to do. So why shouldn't it keep increasing your happiness? One answer is that people do lots of the wrong things with money. I'll give you just one example from some research of mine. I don't have much time, so I won't go into detail, but this is a study in which we actually measure how happy people are as they are going about a variety of daily activities. And you can see here, working, commuting, watching television, talking, having sex, resting. You can ask me later, how do you know how happy they are when they're having sex? We know. We actually know. Okay, now here's data that won't surprise you. People like having sex more than going to work. Big discovery. right? Headline of tomorrow's paper. Of course we like having sex more than going to work, and talking is more fun than commuting. Everybody knows this. But here's the interesting data point. Here's how happy people are when they're resting. About as happy as they are when they're working, and not even as happy as when they're just watching television. Now, the reason I bring this, first of all, we know why this happens. When people are resting, when they're doing nothing, their minds wander. And when their minds wander, they generally wander to bad things, right? Your mind doesn't wander to all the wonderful things that will happen to you. It wanders to that funny rash that you're going to have to go discuss with your doctor soon. So resting and doing nothing doesn't seem to be very pleasant. But what's interesting is, if you ask people, imagine you won the lottery and you suddenly had millions of dollars, what would you do? Their answers are usually some form of rest, right? I would go to the Hawaiian Islands and just lay in a hammock and look up at the blue sky. Wrong answer. You should watch TV and talk during sex. Put those things together, you have happiness. But resting, wrong thing to do. We know a lot of things about how you should and shouldn't spend money. So, for example, a number of studies suggest that people get more happiness buying experiences than material goods. Better to go on a vacation and have nothing to show for it but memories than to buy a new car that's a great deal of fun until it starts to rust in the driveway and you ultimately try to sell it to a neighbor. Spending money on other people rather than yourself. I'm not giving you a sermon. I'm not telling you to be altruists. I'm telling you that if you are a completely selfish human being who wants to increase his or her own happiness, you might try buying coffee for the person in back of you when you go to the coffee shop next time, instead of buying a double latte for yourself. Because no matter what coffee you buy for yourself, you will enjoy it for a brief amount of time. But when you buy coffee suddenly, altruistically for the person in back of you, they'll break down weeping and thanking you, and you'll have a story to tell all day. I think the data are fairly convincing that spending on others brings you more happiness in some circumstances than spending on yourself. Finally, a number of studies suggest that if you ask people, what would you do with $1 million, they name the thing. And what they really ought to do is name 100,000 things that they would do. Because happiness turns out to depend less on the size of the joy you get than on the number of joys you get per day. When I first went to Harvard, I thought there would be untold joys about being a professor at Harvard. I would have this, I would have that. I would do all of these things. It never occurred to me that the great joy would be walking to work and walking home every single day. It's not a big joy, it's a little joy, but it reliably happens 2 times every day, 7 days a week. Okay, last but not least, children. Now, in colloquial English, children are called bundles of joy. So this should be a very easy one. Maybe money makes you happy, maybe marriage makes you happy, but who here is the heartless person who could look at a little baby and not get a big smile, a mega hit of happiness? Certainly the data have something to say about this, and what they tell us reliably is that, people with children are not as happy as people without them, and people whose children actually live with them are the least happy people we know. Now again, this could be because children make you unhappy. The other possibility is that unhappy people have children, right? Maybe if you're really happy, you just travel the world, but if you're unhappy and there's a big hole in your life, you try to make babies to fill it. I think it's a dumb theory, but these data don't rule it out. These data kind of do. Follow the same people over time, and here's a typical pattern of happiness before and after the birth of the first child. Now, here's what my mom says happens. You have a baby, it makes your life happy. Here's what the data say. You have a baby, and your happiness decreases. It decreases for men, it decreases for women. Women seem to get a little bit of a bump from the little bump as they're approaching birth and just thereafter, but pretty soon they join their partners down in the valley of despair. Now I'm kidding. They're not in the valley of despair, but their happiness has gone down and reliably stays down for quite a long time. I know this is hard to believe. You think these data must be wrong, so I'll show you some data collected by a rather well-known scientist, Professor Kahneman. One of his studies, they followed about 800 women around and found out how happy they were as they were going about normal everyday activities. And you won't be surprised to find that women are awfully happy when they're with their friends. They are happy when they're eating. They're not that happy when they're doing housework. Grocery shopping isn't that good. And the big question is, how happy are they when they're with their own children? And the answer is they're extremely not happy. That is, not statistically distinguishably different than actually cleaning the toilet in the house. Okay, now, I know you find this to be slightly amusing, but wildly counterintuitive. Science asks us to believe data, not intuition. If you believe your intuition, then you believe the Earth is flat, because everywhere you look, it looks flat. And yet, we get this picture from outer space, and we go, wow, maybe the world isn't the way it appears to me. What I want to suggest to you is the kind of data that psychologists and economists and neuroscientists collect about human happiness is sort of a view of human happiness from outer space. It's a dispassionate view of who's happy and who's not, taken simply by counting smiles and counting heads. And the data are pretty clear. If you were an extraterrestrial watching from another planet, you would conclude the humans that have little humans around them don't seem quite as happy as the humans that don't. Now, I don't think that's a very disputable fact, but I think what's interesting is that none of us really believes it. Everybody here is thinking, yeah, there's something wrong with the way they did those studies. That can't be right. Come on, my kids. They're the greatest source of happiness in my life. Well, I'm a dad. I'm even a grandparent, and I feel exactly the same way. So the interesting question is, why do we all have an intuition that is entirely at odds with the data? And I'm going to suggest in closing, there are 3 answers to this question. 3 reasons why we believe children make us happy, even though the data suggests this isn't true. The 3 reasons are Armani socks, heroin, and baseball. So I could take questions now, and I will unpack these for you. So, this is a pair of cashmere socks. I don't own cashmere socks. You have to be in a different income bracket than I have to buy cashmere socks, because cashmere socks cost over $100 a pair. But here's something I know about cashmere socks. If I could be induced to buy a pair, at first I would feel like the biggest idiot in the world. But then I would put them on and I would start walking and I'd start saying things like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, ooh. Oh, now I'm getting it. Oh my God, this is like walking on angel's wings. This is amazing. My God, I finally see the light. And I would start telling other people, you've got to buy some cashmere socks. Why do I know this? Because a basic law of economics is people pay a lot for things they love. A basic law of psychology is people love a lot the things they pay for. The more you can make somebody pay, the more they will love the thing they bought. What does that sound like? Children, yes, children. Of course you pay for them in money, from dental work to college tuition, but you pay for them in blood and sweat and tears and hair. You pay for them in every way. They are hard work. Sacrificing for them is built into our DNA. What kind of idiot would you be to do that if they didn't make you happy? And so you have them and you say, wow, I'm up all night, but oh, wait a minute, I think I get it. Yes, children, and you have to have some too. There are even some data suggesting this is true. Bring parents into a laboratory and have them read one of 2 kinds of magazine articles. One magazine article talks all about the benefits of having children, how much joy they will bring you, how they'll care for you in your old age. Another magazine article talks only about the costs of having children, how expensive it will be, how much time and energy and money they will drain from you. After reading these magazine articles, parents are asked a simple question: how much do you enjoy spending time with your kids? And what's the answer? Well, you might expect that after reading about how costly children are, you would decide maybe you don't like yours very much. But in fact, exactly the opposite is true. When you remind parents of how costly children are, they report enjoying their time with them even more. Why? Oh, you just have to have some to see. If you had them, you'd know. It's really hard to explain, but you gotta buy a pair. Okay. So one reason we think that our children bring us a lot of happiness is because they don't. Now, heroin. It would be, you hear people say that heroin is a great source of human misery. And there is a way in which it is, but there's a way in which it isn't. I don't know about you, but I've had back surgery, so I've had the opiates, morphine, Demerol. They're great. No misery. No. Nirvana, heaven, joy, bliss. Just about the best feeling I've ever had. So how can heroin be a source of misery when every time you take it, you feel great? Well, one answer is that heroin makes you feel so good that it will crowd out every other source of pleasure in your life. You will stop working. You will stop interacting with your family. You'll stop paying for your house. You will stop brushing your teeth. You will just go sit in a corner anywhere you can and take heroin because that thing is so good. Now, the heroin itself will make you feel good, but the net effect of heroin is to ruin your life. What does that sound like? Yeah, okay. So, you look at a little baby and it's a little bit like a heroin high. Oh joy, oh joy, oh joy, oh joy. And the little baby is a heroin high, but the little baby will stop you from doing all the things that were slightly less highs, like, going to the movies, seeing your friends, having sex, bathing regularly, devoting yourself to your job, reading books, you name it. The list is long. Children crowd out the other pleasures of life because they're just so demanding. They take so much from us. So the net effect of children is that your net happiness can go down, even though every time you look at that child, you go, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. I once had a woman come up out of the audience after I talked about children and happiness, and she said, Professor Gilbert, my child is my greatest source of joy. To which I said, when you have one source of joy, it is by definition your greatest source of joy. And this is true, not entirely, but it's not a bad summary of life for many parents. Now, finally, baseball. So, are Israelis obsessed with baseball, or is it only Americans and Japanese? Okay, well, this is going to be hard to explain. All right, so I live in Boston. My team is the Red Sox. We don't care if they win. We only care if they beat the New York Yankees. It's a great baseball rivalry. Now, if I were to go to the ballpark to watch a game between my team and their arch rival, and for 9 innings, that's how long a baseball game lasts, nothing happens. It's called a no-hitter, right? Nobody hits the ball. Okay, baseball works like this. Man stands there, tries to, I'm getting so many blank looks. So I will move right along. I watched this game that is a no-hitter, and then at the very end of the game, my guy comes up and he swings the bat and he hits the ball out of the park, and we win 1-0. Now, when I go home, my wife will say, how was the game? And I will say, oh, it was fantastic. You should have seen that ball sailing over the left field fence. It was a marvelous moment, and we won. That's the wrong answer. The right answer to her question, how was the game, is it was remarkably boring. It was dull. It was 3 excruciating hours of watching nothing happen that ended in a single transcendent moment when we killed our rivals. Now, here's why that's important. One of the things we know about human memory, again, thanks to Professor Kahneman, is that the way people remember episodes is by their highest peak and their final moments. So I'm remembering this 3-hour baseball game as great when actually it was a crummy time with a single great moment. That's a day with a 5-year-old. Most of the day is spent saying, not now, not yet, don't hit your brother, I already told you, no, we're not buying it. If you do that again, we're going home. It's a big no-hitter. And then there's these moments, just when you think, I'm leaving the stadium, I don't want to stay any longer. The 5-year-old looks up at you with chocolate ice cream on her face and says, I love you because you're the bestest daddy who ever lived. Yeah, grand slam home run of the heart. And at the end of the day, when my wife says to me, "How was the day?" I go, "Oh, it was wonderful." No, it wasn't wonderful. It really wasn't. It was a very bad day, punctuated by an extraordinary, transcendent moment. Children bring us moments of joy, this is my opinion, I speak only as a parent, that are kind of unparalleled by anything, maybe even heroin. But those moments are rare. Most of the time, we're just working hard. If we were to count all the moments we spent with a child and add up the amount of happiness we got over the moments, we would find that basically we like doing everything else more than being with our kids. Just like scientists find when they do exactly that. But if you ask a parent, what the parent will remember is that for all of that hard, tedious work, there were transcendent moments that made it all worthwhile. Now, I came here to tell you that marriage makes you happy for a little while, and you can probably nod and say that's true. Came here to tell you money makes you happy, though it could make you a lot happier if you knew how to spend it, and you say that's true. And then I came to tell you children basically don't make you happy, and you're thinking, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. How did that guy ever get a job at Harvard? I want to suggest to you that you may have misunderstood. I did not say that your children don't make you happy. I didn't say you don't love them, and that's what many people will have heard me say. Consider a number of things. First, the data I have shown you are data for people on average. You're not average, right? You've come to this conference. You are already in the top 2% on a number of dimensions. If you are thinking, this is not my experience, you may well be right. It may not be your experience. But please don't privilege your experience and think that the way children feel for you is the way they feel for most people in the world. Our business is going out and talking to the other 98% of the human race, and what we find is they don't all agree with you. Second, I didn't say don't have children. I didn't say you'd be happier if you didn't have them. Remember what I said was that people with them don't seem to be as happy, or surely are not happier than people without. But that doesn't mean that if you didn't have children, you'd be like the people who chose not to. We can't do random assignment experiments.
אנחנו לא יכולים לעשות ניסויים אקראיים שבו אומרים, אתה יהיו לך ילדים ואתה לא, ואז נראה אם הילדים יגרמו לכם להיות מאושרים. יכול להיות שאנשים שרוצים ילדים, שרוצים ילדים ואכן עושים ילדים מפחיתים באושרם, אבל אנשים שרוצים ילדים ואין להם, יש להם הפחתה עוד משמעותית יותר ברמת הראש. הרצון לילדים אולי המחלה שתגרום לכם להיות לא מאושרים, והדרך שבה אתם יכולים להיות הכי פחות לא מאושרים זה באמת לעשות ילדים. עכשיו זה נשמע כאילו אני אומר משהו רע עליכם, לא על ילדים. עכשיו אני הרבה יותר פופולרי אולי. לא, תשמעו באמת. אנחנו יודעים שהפער, פער האושר שבין אנשים שיש להם ואין להם ילדים הוא מאוד גדול במדינות מסוימות כמו במדינתי וקטנים הרבה יותר במדינות אחרות.
What that means is that it has something to do with the way we parent children, right? It doesn't have to be the case that our children don't bring us happiness. It just happens to be the case. Just as money would make you happy if you could spend it right, maybe children would make us happy if we parented them correctly. So the burden is not on children to be easier to take care of. Maybe the burden is on us to figure out why we're not letting something that could be a great source of happiness in our lives be that source. Finally, before you resist the claim that children don't make you happy, consider the possibility that it's actually the best thing about you. That the best thing about us as a species is that we are willing to sacrifice for people we love, even though they don't make us smile all the time, even though they are hard work. Maybe it is the most noble thing about our species. If they made us happy, we would just be investing in another selfish pleasure. Maybe the fact they don't tells us something wonderful about ourselves. So marriage, well, yes, if it's a good one. Money, yes, but a little buys a lot, and a lot only buys a little bit more. And children, not so much. At least that's not the day to say. Now, what's the moral of this story? I think the moral of the story is probably something like, I think I've probably hit the bottom on popularity in Jerusalem. I may as well go this far. Don't trust your mother. She loves you, she means well, but the only stories she can tell you about happiness are from her life and the stories she's heard. Science has now gotten into the business of happiness, and it can shed light on the facts. It can't tell us what we should value, but it can certainly tell us which of the decisions we make are and are not most likely to lead to happiness. It's the place we go for information about wealth. It's the place we go for information about health. I'd like to suggest it is a place to go for information about the secret of happiness. Thank you.